Hey guys, tonight we're going to do something a little different. You're not just learning history, you're living it. Imagine this, you blink open your eyes to find yourself in a narrow, drafty bedroom in 1860s London. The mattress beneath you is lumpy straw, the wallpaper is peeling in faded florals, and worst of all, you can't breathe. That's not because of smoke or fog. It's the corset. It's already on, tightly laced, squeezing your ribs like a Victorian python with a keen sense of fashion. Your arms are tucked under stiff linen sleeves, and you can feel a sticky, waxy residue in your hair, from yesterday's attempt to curl it using heated iron rods and actual bare fat. Welcome to your new life. You're a woman in mid-Victorian England, and you have zero rights, zero breakfast, and zero say in what happens next. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, what's your location and what time is it there right now? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you feel is how cold it is. Victorian mornings don't begin with coffee and cozy socks, they begin with frost and silence. Coal is expensive, and the little stove in your room hasn't been lit in days. The air bites your skin. Your toes are like small corpses. There's a chamber pot in the corner you don't want to look at, and the faint scratch of mice behind the wainscoting reminds you you're not alone. A knock at the door jolts you upright, if you can call it upright. Your corset prevents much more than a polite incline. The maid has come to fetch you, though she barely looks older than 12. She's barefoot. Her name is probably something tragic like Mabel. She speaks softly, eyes averted. Mrs. says you're to come down now. You're expected downstairs not because you're special, but because you're part of the household machine. Whether you're a lady of modest means or a housemaid in borrowed lace, the gears of propriety begin grinding the second you open your eyes. You try to stand, but the dizziness hits immediately. That's normal. Corsets don't just compress your lungs, they politely suggest to your internal organs that they vacate the premises. You totter to the basin, no running water, obviously, and splash your face with icy liquid from a cracked jug. It doesn't help. The mirror above the basin is fogged, cracked at the corner, and the face staring back is, well, it's yours now. Getting dressed takes forever, because fashion in 1860 is roughly 12 layers deep. Chemise, corset, petticoat, crinoline cage, underskirt, overskirt, bodice, collar, brooch, gloves, hair ribbon. You haven't even put on shoes yet. And all of it weighs about as much as a medium-sized terrier. The crinoline makes doorways feel like puzzles. You are, effectively, a hoop in a hat. The room spins slightly again, and you lean against the wall. You're starving. But in this world, that's not an excuse. Fainting, in fact, is almost fashionable. It shows you're delicate. Ladylike. Completely unfit for physical survival. Somewhere downstairs, a bell rings, the kind used to summon servants. It's unclear whether you're meant to answer it or just not be in the way. Either way, you're already late for the complicated performance known as being a woman. Now, let's zoom out for a moment. Victorian England was a deeply stratified society. If you're upper class, your corset is laced by someone else. If you're middle class, you do it yourself and pretend it's fine. If you're lower class, you might not wear one at all because hunger is its own kind of tightness. But the expectations are the same: modesty, obedience, and the ability to embroider without poking your own eye out. Historically, this era was one of contradictions. Queen Victoria ruled an empire that spanned continents, yet women couldn't vote, own property after marriage, or even attend most universities. Historians still argue whether the Victorian obsession with virtue was driven more by genuine belief or social control. And then there's the fringe fact: corsets weren't just fashion, they were advertised as health devices. That's right. Some doctors thought they helped support the womb. Others believed they caused hysteria. But everyone agreed that women should just quietly endure them. Back in your borrowed skin, you finally fumble your way out of the room. The hallway creaks beneath your boots. Gaslights hiss. The stairwell is steep and slippery with wax polish. Every step is a gamble. And yet, oddly, you begin to settle into the rhythm of it. There's a strange beauty in the dust motes, the patterned wallpaper, the smell of lavender water mixed with coal smoke. You're part of a living museum. Downstairs, the house is coming alive, footmen shuffling, a cook barking at someone, the smell of burning toast. And somewhere, someone playing scales on a badly tuned piano. This is your new life. You are corseted tight. And your day has only just begun. You reach the bottom of the stairs, and suddenly everyone's moving around you with the kind of quiet panic that says someone important is about to come through a door. A maid with arms full of folded linen nearly knocks you over. A boy no older than 8, clearly the scullery assistant, scurries past with a tray of what looks like yesterday's bread crusts and some impressively overboiled tea. You step aside, your crinoline bumping a side table so hard that a vase wobbles and everyone within earshot inhales. You've arrived in the Victorian household hierarchy, a place so rigid it makes modern office politics look like a beach vacation. Breakfast is being prepared, but not for you. Not yet, anyway. If you're of the lower middle class or a servant yourself, your role this morning is clear. Clean, carry, polish, serve, and definitely don't eat until all the more important stomachs are satisfied. Your corset feels tighter by the minute, but hunger pangs are easier to ignore when you're moving constantly. And move you must. Because to pause, to sit, even to lean, is to risk being labeled as idle. And in 1860, idle is one shade away from moral failure. The dining room is an echo chamber of clinking silver and muffled expectations. The master of the house sits stiffly at the head, newspaper in hand, absorbing only the headlines that confirm his own worldview. The mistress, in a bonnet that could serve as its own carriage, sips weak tea while silently inspecting the dust level on the window frames. You notice she winces slightly when she raises her cup, rheumatism, probably, though she'd sooner be caught dead than admit it. You hover at the threshold, watching as steaming plates are served with clockwork precision. Eggs, kedgeree, ham slices, and toast so dry it might spontaneously combust. Food is not just sustenance here, it's proof. Proof of status, of success, of domestic order. And yet, you don't get any. Not yet. As a Victorian woman, particularly one who is not of the upper crust, you're expected to be gracefully hungry. Breakfast will come only after the lords and ladies have had their fill. Maybe. If there are leftovers. If you're lucky. If no one decides your waist looks thicker today and puts you on vinegar water and self-control instead. There's a quirky little Victorian diet trend you may find amusing. Some women believe drinking lemon juice and chewing charcoal would melt away stubborn weight. Historians still argue whether these were acts of agency or desperation, but either way, yum. Eventually, you're summoned into the smaller side parlor where the young ladies, your apparent social peers for the day, are gathered. One of them offers you tea from a floral pot with a thin silver spout and a chip in its lid. You're handed a slice of bread that looks like it was sliced last week and a dab of gooseberry jam so microscopic you wonder if it's there by accident. But you say thank you. Of course you do. The conversation is light, like a doily, weather, lace trims, and who's marrying whom. One girl, tall and bone-pale with permanent surprise etched into her brow, mentions that she's allowed to eat grapes now because her doctor says her humors are rebalancing. Another claims that Lord Fenwick sneezed in her direction last Sunday, which obviously means engagement is imminent. You try to nod politely, even as your stomach makes a sound that could legally be classified as a cry for help. You excuse yourself. No one notices. In the servant corridor, a bread crust disappears into your mouth so fast that your hand is still holding air when you realize it's gone. It's not much, but it's something. The cook glares at you from across the scullery. She's peeling potatoes with the kind of grim purpose usually reserved for battlefield surgery. You avoid her eyes and walk on. Down in the kitchen, a practical symphony is underway, sizzling, clanging, muttering, the unmistakable smell of scorched porridge clinging to everything. A boy is stirring a pot twice his size, another scrubs black iron pans until his fingers go red. You spot a sliver of cheese on a tray no one's claimed and make a mental note to come back for it when the coast is clear. Victorian kitchens, you realize, are part hell, part theater. Cleanliness is next to godliness, and this is especially true below stairs, where the masters never see the sweat but expect perfection all the same. It's also where gossip simmers just as much as soup. You catch a whispered bit about a cousin in Newgate prison, only took one spoon he did, and another about the mistress's fainting spell at communion last week. Too much gin in her cordial, someone hisses behind a sack of flour. You're learning quickly now. Hunger isn't just physical, it's social. A hunger for warmth, for respect, for conversation that doesn't involve the weather or who might be with child before the banns are read. One final fringe fact for your pocket: some Victorian households believed letting servants eat too well made them lazy or uppity. So they were fed deliberately bland, meager meals as a kind of social leash. Flour pudding. Weak broth. Bread ends. The body stays upright, but the soul gets thin. Back upstairs, the dining room is quiet again. The newspapers are folded, the toast crumbs have been cleared. You're finally allowed to sit, just as the tea's gone cold. You sip it anyway. It tastes like disappointment and iron kettle. But somehow, you've survived breakfast. Sort of. It's Monday. And in this house, and in nearly every other Victorian home across Britain, Monday means one thing: washing day. If breakfast was a delicate war of manners, washing day is trench warfare. The moment you step into the backyard wash house, the air changes. It's wetter, heavier, and filled with the unmistakable tang of lye soap, damp wool, and the slowly brewing regret of 100 generations of women. The walls are stained from years of boiling water and soot, the floor slick with ash and suds. Today, you're expected to help with the linens. Which sounds simple, until you realize that washing linens in 1860 is the equivalent of entering hand-to-hand combat with gravity, mildew, and inherited gender roles. Your first task: carry 2 wooden buckets of water from the pump to the copper boiler. Each one weighs enough to make your arms shake, and the pump handle might as well be made of cast iron coated in soap. You finally manage to fill them and lug them across the courtyard. Your dress is already sticking to your back, and the corset has started biting into your ribcage like a jealous cat. Once the water's hot. And by hot, we mean a rolling, angry boil that could legally be declared soup, you add grated soap made from rendered animal fat and lye. This will eventually peel the skin off your knuckles. You stir it with a paddle the size of a cricket bat, trying not to let the steam scald your face or unravel your very will to exist. Now the real fun begins: scrubbing. Each bedsheet must be plunged, twisted, lifted, beaten, and rinsed until it's somewhat less filthy. Clean is a relative term here. You kneel beside a washboard, rhythmically scouring a stained pillowcase that once belonged to someone's aunt who never quite mastered the art of not drooling in her sleep. By the time you finish 3 sheets, your sleeves are soaked, your knees ache, and your fingers are the texture of pickled walnuts. You've splashed boiling water on your wrist, nothing serious, just a bright pink badge of honor. You're on the verge of tears, and the sun isn't even at its peak. And yet the other women around you, they're still going. One of them, maybe named Nell or Edie, hums a folk song while wringing out a nightgown with terrifying efficiency. She's been doing this since she was 9. You try to copy her motion and nearly fling the garment into the fire. And let's not forget the starching. White linens must be stiff enough to stand up by themselves, or at least crisp enough to make their owners feel morally superior. You dip collars and cuffs into a slurry that smells like overcooked rice and let them dry on wooden racks. The stiffening process is important because, in Victorian logic, a clean shirt equals a clean conscience. Historians still argue whether wash day was a symbol of virtuous domesticity or just an unending punishment for being born female. Either way, it was all-consuming. Entire Mondays were sacrificed to it, and still, the work often spilled over into Tuesday. Victorian etiquette books even included sample washing schedules, with cheerful notes like, wash flannels separately, beat rugs briskly, mend as you go. Mend as you go, by the way, is the 1860s version of suck it up. One lesser-known fact, some households used urine, yes, actual urine, to bleach stubborn stains. It was called chamber lye and was collected in jugs labeled for that exact purpose. You now eye every jug in this wash house with new and understandable suspicion. You attempt to wring out a heavy tablecloth and very nearly dislocate your shoulder. Someone offers a tip, twist from the middle like you're wringing a chicken's neck. You don't know whether to thank her or report her to someone. But you do it anyway, and it works. As the day wears on, the linens are pegged to long lines that stretch from one soot-blackened wall to the other. The wind picks up, and for a moment, everything looks oddly beautiful, white cotton snapping in the breeze like tired flags, steam rising in slow ghostly tendrils, women with sleeves rolled and faces flushed from labor. It's exhausting. Bone deep, ache in your teeth kind of exhausting. And yet you begin to understand why so many songs, stories, and superstitions revolved around the wash house. It was where secrets were shared, gossip exchanged, and tears shed. It was the unofficial confessional of the working woman. A girl beside you sighs, rubs her back, and mutters, "I'd trade all this for one good apple." She says it like it's a joke. But it might not be. You sneak a glance at your reflection in the copper lid, flushed cheeks, limp hair, smudged jaw. You look alive in a way you didn't this morning, even if you feel half dead. And there's still more to do. Laundry must be brought in before it rains, ironed with heavy flat irons heated on the stove, folded neatly, and returned to the proper rooms, often uphill, both ways, with no thank you at the end. Still, you're learning something important. Not just about hardship, but about endurance. About how women in 1860 managed to keep going, day after backbreaking day, fueled by sheer momentum, mutual grumbling, and the occasional dried fig. You've survived washing day. Barely. You smell faintly of boiled linen, wet wool, and the quiet shame of having sweat through your chemise. But no matter. It's time to dress like a proper lady. Or at least attempt the performance. Your arms ache from wash day, your hands are raw, and yet you're expected to present yourself as fresh, modest, and effortlessly beautiful, as if doves fluttered in to lace you up and dabbed rosewater on your temples while whispering compliments in French. Spoiler, no doves. Just you, a mirror with bad lighting, and a pile of Victorian garments that might as well be a fabric-based escape room. First, the chemise. It's your base layer, light cotton, theoretically breathable, though yours feels like it was woven from sandpaper. Next comes the corset. Again. You'd hoped yesterday's effort was the worst of it, but this one is even stiffer and still faintly smells of camphor mothballs. It must be laced tightly. Not snugly. Tightly. That means your ribs will protest, your lungs will file a formal complaint, and your digestion is about to go on strike. Next, drawers. Open crotch. By the way, Victorian women wore split-crotch undergarments because bathrooms, aka chamber pots and outdoor privies, didn't leave room for modest disrobing. It's practical, but unsettling. Then, stockings held up by garters, though they constantly slide anyway. Over those, a petticoat or three, depending on your social class and how cold the house is. One has tiny embroidered roses. Another is stiff with starch. You are now halfway dressed and already require a nap. But wait. It's time for the crinoline cage. This thing is a masterpiece of discomfort, metal hoops stitched into fabric, forming a bell shape around your lower body that expands your personal space by several alarming feet. You could hide a medium-sized dog under it. Or 3 small children. Or just your rapidly eroding dignity. Historians still argue whether crinolines were a fashion innovation or a patriarchal prank. They were originally designed to allow skirts to appear grander without layers of heavy petticoats, but quickly became so wide that women were catching fire by brushing against open hearths. Yes, that happened often enough to be documented. In newspapers. Over the cage goes your underskirt, then overskirt, and finally the bodice, usually boned and buttoned so tightly that you can hear your heartbeat in your ears. The sleeves itch. The collar chokes. Your arms can barely move. But by golly, you look presentable. One quirky trend of the time, hair rats. These were little bundles of your own shed hair, collected from your brush and formed into tiny rolls, used to pad your hairstyle into fashionable shapes. You find one on your vanity. It's a little horrifying. You use it anyway. You try to arrange your hair into a modest updo, but the style guide you're vaguely following assumes you have a lady's maid with 17 fingers. You stab in some pins, pat it with spit, and hope gravity's on your side. Shoes come last, pointed leather boots with laces that require circus-level dexterity to tie. They're a size too small. Everyone's shoes were. It was believed small feet meant refined breeding, even if they made you walk like a limping heron. Fully dressed, you make your way down the hallway and nearly knock over a vase because your crinoline doesn't fit through the doorway. This happens a lot. Sitting becomes an advanced maneuver requiring grace, physics, and an understanding of 19th century furniture. You hover above the wooden settee like a hesitant crane, finally landing with a puff of skirts and a very unladylike grunt. No one reacts. It's normal. Here's a little-known detail: some women wore lead-based face powder to look pale and delicate. Others used crushed beetles for rouge or belladonna drops in their eyes to look dreamy. That's right, literally dilating your pupils to seem more passive and mysterious. Side effects included blurred vision and death, but, you know. Beauty. As you sit stiffly in the drawing room, you notice how little of this outfit is actually for you. It's armor, decoration, and social code. Every piece broadcasts a message, that you are respectable, modest, not too rich, not too poor, possibly marriageable, definitely not scandalous. There's no room for comfort in that equation. You shift slightly. The bodice creaks. You wonder how anyone moves in this stuff. Then you remember, most of them didn't. Not much. The goal was to sit gracefully, sip tea, and occasionally glide across the room like a sentient sugar sculpture. The window is cracked. You can smell coal smoke from the street, and somewhere, someone is shouting in Cockney. You half wish you could throw on a shawl and walk out unnoticed. But with your current silhouette, you'd clear furniture for 6 feet in every direction. There's no stealth in crinoline. Eventually, you're summoned for an outing, to be paraded along the row of shops like a heavily costumed metaphor for class. You rise, wobble slightly, and pretend not to notice the bloodless tingle in your toes. You are dressed. Not comfortably. Not practically. But dressed in full Victorian splendor. Ready to face a world that designed these clothes not for function, but to display what kind of woman you are, or, more accurately, what kind of woman they think you should be. You step outside, and London greets you like a slap in the face with a slightly damp glove. The fog is thick, yellowish, and smells like a cocktail of soot, horse dung, and wet wool. Coal smoke clings to everything, buildings, lampposts, even your eyelashes. You blink through it and realize that walking in 1860 is not a leisure activity. It's an obstacle course. The pavement is uneven, often cracked, and slick from last night's rain. You tiptoe around puddles of unknown origin, lifting your skirts like a reluctant ballerina. A passing cart splashes mud onto your hem, and a child points and laughs before disappearing down an alley shouting something about turnips. And then there's the horse manure. So much horse manure. Every street is lined with the evidence of London's living transportation system. Historians estimate that tens of thousands of horses worked the city each day, and each one left behind a generous trail. This means you're constantly dodging steaming piles with the grace of someone trying not to ruin 12 layers of linen. You clutch your reticule, an embroidered drawstring purse so small it can hold maybe a thimble and a button, and try to act like you belong. Around you, people move briskly. Men in tall hats shout at one another. Women in bonnets avoid eye contact. Street vendors yell about eels, hot potatoes, and something called penny pies that you're fairly sure once contained meat. Recently, a man tips his hat to you, but there's something in his smile that's less, "Good morning, madam," and more, "How far down that corset does the lacing go?" You avert your gaze. You keep walking. But he keeps pace. Welcome to the other hazard of Victorian public life, unwanted attention. Even now, corseted and properly gloved, you're being assessed. Not just your dress, but your posture, your pace, your proximity to other men. One wrong gesture and you risk being mistaken for a streetwalker. Yes, those streetwalkers, the women whose skirts are just slightly too short and whose confidence is enough to earn both disgust and coin. Historians still argue whether Victorian attitudes toward women in public were driven by fear of moral collapse or just garden variety control. Either way, you're expected to walk like a lady, speak like a lady, and respond to hecklers with absolute silence. Because if you speak back, you're bold. If you walk too fast, you're suspicious. And if you smile, well, best not to. Here's a quirky tidbit. Many upper and middle-class women carried parasol canes, umbrellas with reinforced handles that could double as modest self-defense. You wish you had one right now. Instead, you clutch your fan like it's a dagger and shuffle forward. A boy offers to shine your boots, but you're wearing delicate leather that would dissolve at the first brush of polish. You decline politely, and he mutters something unrepeatable in rhyming slang. Your corset doesn't let you turn around fast enough to glare. You pass shop windows lined with goods, hats trimmed with peacock feathers, bottles labeled elixir of lavender and opium, patent corset tighteners, boot buttons, and, oddly, taxidermy squirrels posed in little hats. You stop and stare for a moment too long. People notice. The societal pressure to appear busy and respectable is intense. You cannot loiter. You cannot fidget. You definitely cannot sneeze without at least 3 embroidered handkerchiefs and a muttered apology. Someone behind you clears their throat in judgment, and you shuffle on. You step off the pavement for a moment and nearly roll your ankle on a loose cobblestone. Your crinoline tangles around your boots, and for a split second, you see your life flash before your eyes, or at least your breakfast tea. But you recover. Barely. Your dignity, however, remains in that puddle by the apothecary door. You duck into a narrow alley to catch your breath. The fog is even thicker here, and it carries with it the scent of cabbage, coal, and possibly something dead. You lean against a brick wall and wonder why anyone thought this was romantic. Victorians had a way of romanticizing everything: fog, poverty, melancholy, death. It's all so poetic until it gets under your fingernails. Someone else enters the alley, a young man, cheeks smudged with ash, cap low over his eyes. He walks past without a glance. You relax. Then a second figure appears. This one doesn't walk past. Lost, are ya? His voice is low, and he steps just a bit too close. He isn't shouting. He's worse, he's calm. And in this century, there's no hotline, no pepper spray, no cell phone in your corset to dial for help. All you have is your posture, your voice, and your crinoline, which at this point you consider weaponizing. You raise your chin and say the one phrase drilled into every respectable woman: "I'm expected at Mrs. Wilton's tea." It's code for, "I am watched, I am not alone, I will scream and cause a scene." Thankfully, it works. He scoffs, mutters something about sour little spinsters, and disappears into the smoke. You wait until he's gone. Then you breathe. Victorian London is not for the faint of heart. It is beautiful in its own, grimy way, but it is not gentle. Not to the poor, not to the foreign, and certainly not to women trying to walk alone. You continue on, skirts swishing with the rhythm of a world that keeps moving, whether or not you're ready for it. You finally reach the shopping street, a busy, noisy stretch of cobbled road flanked by crowded shop fronts and overhanging signs that creak ominously in the breeze. If you thought this outing might be fun, think again. Shopping in 1860 isn't a breezy stroll with a credit card. It's more like a test of stamina, class performance, and how long you can stand still while being looked at like an unpaid bill. First stop, the apothecary. You've been tasked with purchasing something vague and unhelpful like a tonic for nerves. You step through the green-painted doorway into a cool, dark interior filled with shelves lined in bottles, powders, leeches, and serious-looking jars labeled things like tincture of opium, chlorodyne, and Godfrey's cordial, which is mostly alcohol with a dash of morphine and, ironically, often given to babies. Behind the counter stands a man who regards you with the expression of someone forced to explain chamomile for the 100th time. He adjusts his spectacles and says, "Yes, miss," in a tone that suggests you'd better know what you want. You don't. You mumble something about needing a calming syrup. He nods and turns to his wall of vials, pulling down a bottle with a fading label and a cork that looks like it's been there since Waterloo. "This'll help the nerves," he says. "Bit of laudanum. Just a drop or two." You take it. Of course you do. You're Victorian now. Laudanum is the era's go-to cure for everything from toothache to existential dread. No one warns you about the side effects because side effects won't be invented for another few decades. The cost is 3 shillings, more than you have. You offer a coin and say, "The rest will be sent by Mrs. Weatherby." You don't know who that is. But it's a very Victorian thing to say. The apothecary scowls but nods. The system works. Back outside, you continue along the row of shops. A milliner's window catches your eye, hats of all shapes and sizes arranged like an avian masquerade ball. Velvet turbans, feathered bonnets, lace caps so delicate they practically evaporate when you exhale. You step inside and are immediately engulfed by the scent of lavender sachets and starch. The shopgirl glides toward you with the kind of energy that says she's seen 1,000 ewes today and has judged each of them accordingly. She calls you "Miss" with a smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes and asks, looking for something special, which translates to, "Please don't touch anything unless you can afford it." You ask about hair ribbons. It's the safest choice. She presents you with a tray of them, each more absurdly delicate than the last. One has embroidery so fine it probably took someone's entire childhood to stitch. You pick the simplest, cream-colored silk with a stitched edge, and she nods approvingly. 2 pence. You pay it. You own exactly one thing now. And then comes the cosmetics shop, which is a bit of a Victorian contradiction. Technically, ladies aren't supposed to wear visible makeup, it's associated with actresses, courtesans, and moral decline. But enhancing one's natural beauty? Entirely acceptable. The shelves are lined with powders, creams, and lotions in little glass pots. Many of them contain ingredients you recognize from horror stories: mercury for skin lightening, lead in face powder, arsenic wafers to brighten your complexion from the inside out. That's right. Eat enough arsenic, and your skin will develop a porcelain glow, right before your liver fails. Historians still argue whether these deadly ingredients were used knowingly or just accepted as part of the price of beauty. Either way, you select a tiny tin labeled Blush of Mayfair. It smells like crushed rose petals and possibly formaldehyde. The shopkeeper wraps it in waxed paper and hands it over with a knowing look. No one says the word makeup. You both pretend it's for a friend. Outside again, you weave past hawkers selling buttons, bootlaces, ribbons, soap, and novelty postcards featuring Queen Victoria in various degrees of stiffness. A boy tries to sell you a hedgehog in a basket. You consider it for a moment. Honestly, the hedgehog might offer better company than most of your acquaintances. One lesser-known Victorian shopping experience, the curiosity shop. You spot one tucked between a pawnbroker and a print seller, its window filled with old bones, taxidermy lizards, preserved frogs in jars, and something that might be a mummified hand. Curiosity shops were the original oddity museums, full of weird relics from far-off colonies or local legends. You step inside and immediately regret it. The air is musty, and the proprietor looks like he hasn't slept since the Reform Act. He shows you a collection of witch bottles said to trap evil spirits, a set of false teeth in a velvet case, and a pressed bat mounted under glass. You smile politely, claim to have left your purse at home, and escape back into the relative sanity of manure-scented London. As your shopping trip winds down, your hands are chafed from carrying parcels, your boots pinch in strange new ways, and your stomach reminds you, again, that bread crust and jam do not a lunch make. Shopping in 1860 is not about joy. It's about performing class, status, and restraint. It's a public theater where every coin spent, every glance given, every word spoken, must align with your invisible script. Still, as you walk home through fog and bustle, ribbon in one hand and bottle of liquid sedation in the other, you begin to feel something oddly triumphant. You have survived Victorian retail. With your corset intact and your eyebrows mostly unjudged. And honestly, that's no small feat. You return home with aching feet and a strange sense of victory, only to be greeted by your next unavoidable challenge, the Victorian afternoon. It is not restful. It is not indulgent. It is a strictly structured interlude in which you're expected to be both socially presentable and energetically useless. You shed your outerwear, hat, gloves, shawl, and place them carefully on the hall stand. Heaven help the woman who slings her bonnet like a barbarian. A maid silently appears to collect your parcels, her expression unreadable except for the faintest smirk at the hedgehog-sized box you didn't buy. You suspect she knows more about your shopping failures than you do. You make your way upstairs for your afternoon rest and toilette, which sounds delightfully luxurious but mostly consists of sitting very still while someone else tries to fix your hair. The small upstairs sitting room is warm and fragrant with faded rosewater, and your lady's maid, Clara, who is probably younger than you and approximately 100 years more competent, brushes out your curls while you wince. Your scalp itches from the morning's tightly pinned coiffure. Victorian haircare is less self-care Sunday, and more a ritual of mild torment. There's no shampoo in the modern sense, most women clean their hair monthly with egg yolk, borax, or vinegar. And don't even ask about lice. Actually, do. They were so common that children wore amber beads or rosemary sprigs to ward them off. Spoiler, they didn't work. Clara pins your hair back into something appropriately ladylike, no wild tendrils or devilish ringlets, thank you, and offers you a cooling lavender water for your wrists. It smells like old lace and herbal determination. Now dressed, powdered, and coiffed into peak respectability, you're informed that Mrs. Everleigh is calling. No one asked if you wanted company. That's not how it works. In the parlors of 1860, calling hours are sacred. You're expected to receive guests like a junior ambassador, with just the right balance of charm and non-threatening opinions. Tea is served. Topics are limited. Smiling is compulsory. You descend the stairs to the drawing room and are greeted by Mrs. Everleigh, a woman who smells of violets and judgment. She's brought her small dog and even smaller daughter, both of whom stare at you with the same unblinking curiosity. You make polite conversation about the weather, a new piano teacher no one likes, and whether the Queen's daughter's marriage will go through. Historians still argue whether these drawing room exchanges had any sincere meaning or were just Victorian social aerobics, flexing etiquette muscles in the hope of long-term survival. As tea is served, lukewarm and slightly tannic, with cream that might be clotted from confusion, the conversation shifts to a new form of entertainment, photography. Mrs. Everly's cousin's neighbor has just had a carte de visite taken, and you are invited to admire it. It's a stiff little rectangle of sepia and anxiety. The subject looks halfway between immortal and embalmed. You nod, agree that photography is the future, and tactfully avoid mentioning that, from your perspective, it's also the past. You are very Victorian now. You notice the tea cakes have barely been touched, which is a shame because you're ravenous. Still, it's considered vulgar to eat more than one. So you break a currant bun into neat pieces and chew each bite slowly, fantasizing about pizza, dumplings, or even a slightly sad sandwich. When the Everlys finally leave, dog, daughter, and all, you collapse onto a chaise like a romantic heroine in an etching. Your corset doesn't let you lie down properly, so you half-perch like a stork on a branch. You begin to understand that Victorian afternoons are not for enjoyment. They are for enduring beauty. For proving, to yourself and everyone else, that you can exist with grace under pressure and lace under everything. As the daylight fades, your thoughts drift toward books. In 1860, reading is considered an essential pastime, but not all books are created equal. As a respectable lady, your options are largely confined to improving novels and religious tracts. But there's a loophole, the circulating library. These establishments, often tucked inside stationery shops or apothecaries, allow readers to rent books by the volume. Triple-decker novels are all the rage, published in 3 separate bindings, so you'll need to come back, and pay again, to finish them. Clever business. You retrieve your current volume, The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, and settle into a chair by the window. The gaslight flickers as you lose yourself in the eerie, Gothic world of mistaken identity and sinister secrets. It's oddly comforting. At least no one in the novel is trying to inspect your tea habits. But just as you're reaching the good part, you're called to write a few social notes. That's right, thank you letters, invitations, delicate refusals, all by hand, in ink, with no margin for error. You pull out your stationery box, embossed paper, goosefeather pen, and a tiny pot of ink as unforgiving as your corset. One blot, and it's over. You begin, Dear Miss Fairchild, thank you ever so much for the delightful. Your wrist cramps immediately. Historians still argue whether Victorian women truly enjoyed this endless correspondence or were simply trained to endure it. Either way, your penmanship is developing muscles you didn't know existed. You finally finish 3 letters and nearly weep with relief. As twilight deepens, you draw the curtains and stare out at the gaslit street. Horses clip by. A lamplighter swings his long pole to ignite the evening's flames. The city is transforming again, from industrious to dreamy, from brisk to shadowed. You've survived your first proper Victorian afternoon. And you still haven't fainted from hunger or emotional repression. That's progress. Evening in Victorian London does not descend quietly. It drips in like molasses, slow, smoky, and thick with the scent of coal and candle wax. The gaslights flicker to life one by one down your street, each a miniature sun burning through the dusk, and the world softens at the edges. Dinner is on its way. But don't get too excited. If you were hoping for comfort food and elastic waistbands, think again. This is dinner as ritual, not indulgence. A Victorian dinner is a parade of formality, social theater, and indigestion waiting to happen. You return upstairs, where Clara helps you change into your evening dress. Yes, another dress. You've already had at least 2 outfit changes today, and this one is the most constrictive of all. The skirt is vast, supported by crinoline, and the bodice so tight you wonder if it's laced by engineers. You stare at yourself in the mirror. You look like a slightly haunted cupcake. You descend the staircase carefully, your slippers clicking softly on polished wood. One hand lifts your skirt just enough to avoid catastrophe. You enter the dining room at exactly the right moment, not early enough to appear overeager, not late enough to seem unruly. Timing is everything. The room glows with golden lamplight. Crystal glasses and silver forks wink at you from across the table like tiny snobs. You're seated with your family, or if you're visiting relatives. A collection of very polite strangers who spend a great deal of time complimenting the soup. There's a set order to this. Dinner follows a structured menu. It might start with a clear broth or consommé, then proceed to fish, usually smothered in a cream sauce, followed by roasted meats, stewed vegetables, and finally pudding. Not dessert, pudding. Even when it's not pudding. A mainstream historical fact for you: Queen Victoria's own household followed a similar schedule, with meals served at 8 p.m. sharp and guests expected to follow exacting etiquette. Elbows on the table. Social ruin. Buttering your entire roll at once. You might as well defect to France. And the conversation? It follows its own invisible lanes. You're expected to be lively, but not loud. Informed, but not overbearing. You may reference a newspaper article, but don't quote it. This isn't a courtroom. You may mention your cousin's marriage, but not her fertility concerns. Those are saved for the much louder whispers of Tuesday morning tea. Halfway through the meat course, you realize you haven't truly tasted anything. Everything is slightly warm, slightly overcooked, and swimming in something either beige or beige adjacent. The wine is sweet and cloying, and the water smells faintly of lead pipe. Still, you smile. That's your job tonight. At one point, a dish appears that you can't identify. Is it pigeon? Rabbit? One of the maids? You decline politely and pretend your stomach isn't trying to rewrite your last will and testament. Here's a quirky historical tidbit: the Victorians were oddly obsessed with gelatin molds. It was considered the height of elegance to suspend meats or fruits in trembling towers of aspic. Nothing says refinement like a shimmering loaf of jellied calf's foot. As the final course arrives, spotted dick, perhaps, or a dish simply labeled pudding, despite having no clear genus. You lean back in your chair and pretend to feel sated. You are not. You are corseted, dehydrated, and dangerously close to sneezing from candle smoke. After dinner, the women retire to the drawing room. The men remain behind to talk about politics, tobacco, and brandy. No, you don't get invited. Yes, it's unfair. Historians still argue whether this separation was to preserve feminine delicacy or just to keep women out of the good liquor. In the drawing room, you sip lukewarm tea and listen to Miss Hargrave play the pianoforte. She's quite good, which is unfortunate, because now you'll have to compliment her with sincerity rather than patronizing grace. You do so, and she glows with self-satisfaction. Somewhere, a chandelier twinkles in approval. Soon after, the men drift in, smelling of cigars and overconfidence. A game of whist is suggested, and you are partnered with a colonel who can't remember the rules but insists on playing them anyway. You smile. You shuffle. You lose graciously. The evening winds down with soft conversation and occasional yawns hidden behind lace-edged handkerchiefs. One guest tells a long anecdote about his Aunt Scout, and everyone pretends it's fascinating. It isn't. Eventually, the clock strikes a polite hour. Guests rise, exchange compliments, and depart into the night. You ascend to your room, body aching with the sheer effort of being gracefully decorative for 4 hours straight. Back upstairs, you breathe easier. Clara is waiting. She unlaces your gown with the quiet efficiency of someone who's done this 100 times. The corset comes off, and you gasp like a drowning woman surfacing for air. Your ribs creak in gratitude. You slip into your nightgown, a soft, linen thing with delicate embroidery, and settle by the fire with your book. For a few minutes, you read by lamplight, soaking in the rare silence. Even the city outside has calmed, its cobbled streets now echoing only the occasional hoofbeat or carriage wheel. You reflect. You've made it through your first Victorian evening. You've dined, smiled, curtsied, nodded, nibbled, and pretended to enjoy boiled parsnips. You didn't drop your fork or offend a colonel. You didn't accidentally mention the Irish question or say, pants, instead of trousers. All in all, a resounding success. And somewhere beneath the etiquette, corsets, and decorative gelatin, you sense something else, a strange power in being able to navigate it all. You are performing, yes, but that performance is its own kind of armor. It may be exhausting, but it's also impressive. You're surviving in a world designed to box you in and lace you tight. You snuff the lamp. The room glows only from the dying fire now. Sleep comes slowly in the 1860s, without screens, without fans, without that comforting hum of electricity. But you have your book, your bed, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing you've outlasted pudding, patriarchy, and pianoforte in a single evening. Not bad for day one. Morning once again, though today, it doesn't start with bird song or Clara's gentle knock. No, today begins with the sound of hooves clattering past your window and a sharp rap at the door. A letter has arrived. The kind with wax, ribbons, and flourished ink, the 1860s version of "You're Invited." It's from your Aunt Harriet. You've been summoned for a day of shopping in London. You sigh. Time to lace up your boots, pin your bonnet, and ready your coin purse. This isn't leisure, it's choreography. Clara helps you into your walking dress, a more practical garment than yesterday's evening nightmare, but still a full-body puzzle of petticoats, stays, gloves, parasol, and veil. Your gloves alone have more buttons than a naval uniform. Your parasol doubles as UV protection and modesty shield. A lacy fence between you and anyone with wandering eyes or working-class sweat. As you step outside, the street hits you with its full force, the stink of horse dung, hot iron from nearby smithies, and something you suspect might be turnip soup, or human soup. It's hard to say. Victorian London smells like progress and pestilence. You meet Aunt Harriet at the agreed-upon place, a tea-house tucked between a bookbinder's and a glove-maker's. She greets you with a kiss on the cheek and a critique of your posture. You mustn't droop like a fern in the rain, she says sweetly, adjusting your spine with one gloved hand. Men can smell poor posture. Aunt Harriet is one of those women who speaks in aphorisms and always looks like she's about to attend a funeral or overthrow a small monarchy. You love her dearly. After tea, you set off down Regent Street, past rows of gleaming shop windows. This is a spectacle, a social catwalk. Women stroll slowly, display their bonnets like trophies, and pretend not to notice each other while noticing everything. You do the same. Shopping in 1860 isn't just buying, it's inspecting. Dresses are not picked off racks but selected from bolts of fabric and tailored to order. You and Aunt Harriet visit a milliner, who shows you feathers so large they might have once belonged to mythical birds, and a dressmaker, who clicks her tongue at your waist measurement and mutters about improvements. You're measured, poked, and offered a gown made of velvet so heavy you might sink in it. You nod politely, make vague promises to return, and escape before she brings out the whalebone options. A mainstream historical fact, London's shopping revolution was already in full swing by the 1860s. Department stores like Whiteley's and Marshall and Snellgrove were emerging, offering a new kind of consumer experience, one built around browsing, credit, and a surprising number of fainting couches. It was, in many ways, the birth of modern retail therapy. You stop for lunch at an establishment where the chicken is unidentifiable and the bread tastes faintly of coal. You nibble. You drink weak tea. You listen to Aunt Harriet recount her latest battle with the postmaster over a delayed delivery of morning gloves. Then it's time for the final stop, the chemist's. You step inside to a symphony of strange smells, camphor, lavender, carbolic acid. Bottles line the walls like alchemists' dreams, tonics for liver spots, powders for bile, tinctures for hysteria. A man behind the counter offers you a sample of revitalizing elixir. It tastes like licorice and regrets. Here's a fringe fact, Victorian chemists routinely sold items that would be banned today, arsenic-laced face powder, for instance, or tonics spiked with cocaine, opium, or alcohol. Women applied mercury to their skin, took laudanum for cramps, and rinsed their mouths with chlorinated lime. So yes, you're technically glowing, but that's probably the slow poisoning. Your purchases today include rosewater, a new ribbon for your bonnet, and a discreet pamphlet titled The Modern Lady's Guide to Nervous Conditions, which promises gentle remedies like fresh air, prayer, and the avoidance of Latin poetry. As the afternoon wanes, you and Aunt Harriet walk slowly past Hyde Park. The carriages roll by in procession. A few riders tip their hats. Children play in the grass under strict supervision. You hear a snatch of violin music drifting from an open window above a bakery, and for a moment, it all feels like a painting come to life, picturesque and powdered. But the reality, as always, is layered. Beneath the lace and leisure lies labor, invisible but constant. The seamstress stitching those gowns by candlelight. The errand boy who carried your letter across half the city. The laundress boiling your linens until her hands turned raw. London may be a ladies' playground, but it's built on the backs of the exhausted and unseen. Historians still argue whether Victorian consumer culture empowered middle-class women by giving them economic clout, or merely created a new cage, gilded with shopping lists and crinoline. By the time you part ways with Aunt Harriet, your feet ache, your corset feels like a bear trap, and you're fairly certain the rosewater has leaked into your purse. Still, you smile and thank her for a lovely time, because that's what you do. It wasn't restful, but it was expected. Back home, you peel off your gloves, let your hair down, and collapse onto the bed like a woman who's just run a marathon in a cage. In a way, you have. Even in this moment of solitude, you're aware that your role never really ends. You are a lady. You are display, diplomacy, and decorum on legs. Your life is a series of rehearsals. Each shopping trip, each cup of tea, each tiny feathered hat a performance for a world that expects you to smile and twirl on cue. But there's something else, too. A quiet pleasure in the rituals. A thrill in choosing the perfect ribbon. A satisfaction in navigating a world that wasn't designed with your voice in mind, but where you speak anyway, through gestures, glances, and just the right amount of tilt to your bonnet. You fall asleep that night with aching feet, powdered cheeks, and the vague taste of elixir still on your tongue. Tomorrow will bring more roles to play. But tonight, you rest. The morning sun filters gently through the lace curtains, glancing off the edge of your looking glass and warming the polished floorboards. It's barely past 8 when Clara, ever punctual, tiptoes in with a basin of warm water and a folded note left on a silver tray. The note is from your mother. A brief, looping scrawl: "Please attend the charity committee this afternoon. We need a pair of sensible hands and a softer voice than Lady Portwhistle's. Lunch included." You sigh, reading between the lines. It's not optional. Today, you're off to perform the unpaid public labor of a respectable lady. Your life may appear like a cloud of crinoline and cucumber sandwiches, but beneath that floating exterior is a schedule of charitable duties, religious committees, and painfully polite arguments about where to place the orphanage's new hedgerow. You dress with care, not for glamour, but diplomacy. A muted silk dress, respectable, not showy. Gloves, of course. Modest hat. The effect is meant to whisper, "I care deeply but don't need attention." The committee meets in the drawing room of Lady Portwhistle's house, which is approximately the size of a small cathedral and smells faintly of violets and judgment. You recognize the usual suspects. 3 elderly matrons who sit by the window like gargoyles, 2 younger wives who are clearly hoping to be noticed by a clergyman or newspaper editor, and 1 girl who's either new or terribly lost. Lady Portwhistle herself is already mid-harp speech when you arrive, warning that the parish children are becoming frightfully familiar with Latin. She waves a document about dramatically, something about funding cuts to the soup kitchens. You settle into a creaky chair, smoothing your skirts, and prepare to do battle with lace and logic. This is your arena. You speak gently, framing your arguments with references to the times and a well-placed allusion to scripture. When Lady Portwhistle tries to pivot the conversation toward whether the charity children should be allowed to touch hymnals, you politely redirect back to the food budget. A mainstream fact. Victorian women were often at the helm of philanthropy, using charitable committees and religious associations as one of their few sanctioned routes to power and influence. They ran hospitals, schools, reform homes, and entire social campaigns, all without the right to vote or own property outright in many cases. The fringe tidbit: some women used these roles for more subversive aims. In corners of respectable parlors, plans were whispered, temperance leagues that quietly doubled as feminist alliances, or sewing groups where the hems came second to the politics. Historians still argue whether these spaces were truly empowering or just gilded cages. Some say they were stepping stones, others say they were distractions from revolution. Back to the meeting: by the time lunch is served, you've drafted a proposal to divert funds toward proper winter clothing for the poorer children. Lady Portwhistle, with the grace of someone pretending to have thought of it herself, seconds the motion. The rest nod solemnly over bowls of boiled chicken. The meal is a muted affair, full of restrained coughing, lukewarm praise for the pudding, and the occasional stray political opinion disguised as a joke. Once the business is done and you've had your fill of moral responsibility, you slip away for a moment to the drawing room library. It's small, but well kept. Books line the walls, mostly moral guides and sermons, but tucked between Pilgrim's Progress and a volume on household hygiene, you find something unexpected. A copy of Mary Wollstonecraft's Vindication of the Rights of Woman. You almost laugh. Contraband among the crumpets. You hide it behind a row of hymnals, just in case. You're not quite ready to be branded difficult. Later, you escort a younger girl, Miss Emily, she finally introduces herself, to the edge of the square. She looks like she's about to faint from nerves. Is it always like that? She asks. You smile and say, it gets worse, then it gets better. You don't mean the committee meeting. You mean womanhood. Back home, you find Clara polishing your hairbrushes. You thank her, then sit at your writing desk. A fresh sheet of paper, a new pen nib. You draft a quiet letter to the editor, unsigned, of course, suggesting that soup kitchens should provide food without sermon. You know it won't be published. But you send it anyway. That night, by candlelight, you reread a borrowed copy of Jane Eyre, tracing each line slowly, like prayer. The fire crackles low. The room is soft with lamplight. For a moment, the world feels just slightly tilted in your favor. Even in your stillness, you are working. Learning how to bend without breaking. Practicing the subtle art of insistence masked as modesty. It may not be the revolution. But it's the beginning of one. You wake to rain, the kind that taps on the windows like a visitor too polite to knock properly. It's a Monday, which means the calendar holds nothing glamorous. No charity meetings, no family outings, no balls. Just a long, slow day filled with household administration, quiet tedium, and the endless paper trail of being in charge of the home. Clara brings in the post on a silver tray, 3 bills, 1 letter from your aunt, detailing her latest bout of neuralgia, and a calling card from Mrs. Dunthorpe, who apparently popped by yesterday while you were out and was, quote, most disappointed to have missed you. You place the calling card in a silver-edged dish by the front door. That dish is not decorative. It's your social ledger, a record of who has called, who must be visited in return, and when. To ignore it is to risk full social excommunication, or worse, whispered pity. You slip into your house dress, a simpler cotton affair with soft cuffs and buttons that actually close in front, still elegant, of course, but utilitarian enough that no one would assume you're trying. You settle into the sitting room, open the account book, and begin what Victorian society charmingly calls woman's work. The numbers are modest but never-ending. You check the laundry receipts, is that a missing petticoat, the grocer's monthly statement, why is flour now twice the price, and the milliner's bill for last season's bonnet. You distinctly remember asking for grosgrain ribbon, not satin. Mainstream historical fact, In middle and upper-class households, women were the primary managers of domestic affairs, often overseeing multiple servants, negotiating household purchases, handling correspondence, and keeping a close eye on every shilling spent, without ever technically earning a wage. What no one tells you is that it's exhausting. You are the CEO of a household you cannot legally own. You draft a note to the butcher, he's been delivering fatty cuts again. You leave a reminder for Clara about airing the linen closet. Then it's time to review the weekly menus, noting when the fishmonger delivers and ensuring the maid has not, once again, confused mutton with lamb. There's a knock at the door. It's the cold delivery boy, soaked and sullen. Clara answers, but you step out into the hallway to remind him, gently but firmly, that last week's delivery was short. He shrugs, mutters something about carts and floods. You sigh and record the shortfall in the household ledger. One quirky tidbit: some Victorian women kept secret, domestic diaries, in which they recorded everything from the behavior of servants to the emotional weight of marriage. Some even used code, spies in their own drawing rooms. Historians still argue whether these records were emotional lifelines or just extensions of patriarchal surveillance. Some read like novels. Others read like quiet rebellion. After lunch, a cold slice of pie and weak tea, you venture into the upstairs storeroom. You're inventorying the winter linens today. It's dusty, and a spider watches you from atop a pile of lace-edged pillowcases. You hum softly to yourself as you count: 12 flannel sheets, 3 eiderdowns, 4 woolen coverlets. In the back corner, you find something unexpected. A box of your father's old sketchbooks, long forgotten. You flip one open. Landscapes, mostly. A few ink caricatures of professors, and one unfinished portrait of your mother, back when her hair was still red. You sit there for a long moment. Memory pools around you like lamplight. Then Clara appears in the doorway, holding out a saucer. "Letter for you, miss." You blink and take it. It's from your cousin Charlotte, the one studying in Florence. The letter is bursting with foreign names, strange art, and scandalous tales of walking alone. You blink and take it. It's from your cousin Charlotte, the one studying in Florence. The letter is bursting with foreign names, strange art, and scandalous tales of walking alone, through a marketplace. She mentions wanting to learn to paint with oils. You fold the letter slowly, with a small smile. You should be scandalized. Instead, you feel something else. A hum under the ribs. Like someone knocked on your chest from the inside. Later, as dusk settles in and the rain thickens to fog, you settle into the parlor with a bit of embroidery, still the safest excuse for thought. Outside, the world melts into mist. Inside, the fire snaps and the kettle hisses. You're not unhappy. You're not bored. But you are, perhaps, waiting for something. Some spark. Some change. Some knock on the door that isn't just another bill or social call. You thread the needle slowly, over and over, the fabric growing heavy in your lap. Sometimes, being a Victorian woman is like this. A quiet war of details, fought with teaspoons and thread. You're awoken before dawn by a knock, not at the front door, but your bedroom. It's Clara, whispering just loud enough to stir you. "The scullery maid's gone," she says, clutching a candle. "Left her apron on the stoop. Nothing else." You sit up, groggy. "Gone where?" "No one knows," Clara replies, eyes wide. "Vanished." And just like that, your quiet, well-ordered Victorian life lurches sideways. Running a house with a full staff is difficult. Running it one short is a chaotic ballet of improvisation, politeness, and hidden resentment. You throw on your dressing gown and descend the stairs in slippers, immediately met by the cook, already red-faced and furious. "I'm not scouring pots and boiling sheets," she snaps. "Not my job." You assure her it's temporary. You will sort it. You always do. You write a note to the local hiring office, asking for a replacement, then spend the morning juggling duties. Clara helps, but she's nearing her limit too. Her loyalty is more to you than the structure you both prop up, and it shows. By noon, there's grit under your fingernails and flour on your sleeves. You've scrubbed a tin tub yourself. Twice. A crust of domesticity begins to crack, because beneath the silver service and lavender sachets, the whole operation runs on fragile human threads, pulled taut and fraying. Mainstream historical fact: Victorian domestic service was the largest single occupation for women in 19th century Britain. Yet turnover was high, mistreatment was rampant, and vanishing was not uncommon. Maids might flee abusive employers, unbearable conditions, or simply boredom. Quirky tidbit: some households posted rewards in newspapers for missing maids, alongside lost dogs and runaway carriages. You imagine your own ad: small, mousy girl, answers to Meg. Last seen with soap and a faraway look. Historians still argue whether domestic service empowered working-class women by offering housing and income, or imprisoned them in an invisible, gendered caste. Letters from servants reveal both: one girl's pride in new boots, another's exhaustion at scrubbing silver for 12 hours a day. You set a pot to boil and try not to panic. Everything has a rhythm, even collapse. Later, Mrs. Ashworth drops by for tea, all starched crinoline and inquisitive glances. "No scullery maid," she hums, delighted by the whiff of scandal. How dreadfully inconvenient. She sips her tea like it's your reputation in the cup. You smile thinly. "We're managing." It's not entirely untrue. With Clara's quiet efficiency and your own aching elbows, dinner is served without catastrophe. Only 3 dishes, but still. You haven't wielded a ladle since the influenza outbreak of '57. You eat alone afterward, perched in the kitchen, watching the kettle breathe steam. Then a thought creeps in like rising damp. Why did she leave? You retrace yesterday in your mind. No harsh words. No extra chores. She'd seemed tired, but that's not uncommon. And then, another thought. Would you have left, too, if you could? It's a question that lands like cold stone in your stomach. There's a freedom to disappearing, you suppose. To walking out the back gate, never looking back. A choice. A dangerous, dizzying choice. You shake it off. There's too much to do. That night, as you soak your hands in lavender water and press warmth into your aching wrists, Clara appears at your door with a tray, tea, a biscuit, and a quiet question: "Would you like me to sit a while?" You nod. She settles beside you, both of you gazing into the fire. The air smells of chamomile and ash. "Where do you think she went?" Clara asks softly. You don't answer right away. Because deep down, you're not sure if you're worried for the girl. Or jealous of her. The morning begins in gray drizzle, the kind that clings to your skirts and dampens everything, including your mood. Clara is off on errands, and the replacement maid hasn't arrived yet. It's quiet, too quiet. The ticking clock on the mantel is the only sound as you sip lukewarm tea and pretend you're not overwhelmed. The library seems like a good place to hide from the day. You wander in with a feather duster and a vague intent to organize the volumes. Really, you just want a moment of stillness. The fireplace is cold, but you kneel before it anyway, brushing ash from the hearth. That's when you see it. A folded scrap of paper, thin as onion skin and tucked just behind the andiron. You hesitate. Just long enough to feel guilty. Then you unfold it. It's a letter, no envelope, no address. Just looping handwriting and ink faded by the hearth's old heat. You recognize the style instantly. It belongs to Mr. Hargrave, the master of the house. You've seen his notes to the grocer, his flourished HS and narrow TS. This isn't meant for you. You keep reading anyway. She cannot stay. You know this as well as I do. The damage is already done, and the longer she remains under our roof, the greater the risk. If you insist on playing the benevolent fool, then so be it, but I wash my hands of the matter. Your breath hitches. The letter is unsigned, but clearly part of a longer exchange. You flip it over, blank. No date. No name. You sit back, feeling like you've touched something poisonous. Mainstream historical fact: private letters in Victorian homes were often hidden in furniture, under floorboards, or behind paintings. Servants occasionally found them while cleaning, many ended up in police reports, blackmail schemes, or family dramas best left unspoken. Quirky tidbit. Some upper-class Victorians burned personal letters in elaborate, letter bonfires, fearing that even after death, their reputations might be scandalized by a nosy niece or enterprising biographer. Clearly, someone here forgot that step. Historians still argue whether women's domestic roles allowed them subversive access to household power, or simply tethered them to the whims of others' secrets. Either way, you now carry something you shouldn't know, and that changes everything. You slip the letter into your apron pocket, unsure why. Evidence. Insurance. Curiosity. You return to your routine, but the words echo in your skull. The damage is already done. What damage? Who was she? Was it the maid who vanished? A relative? Someone, still here? You steal glances at Mrs. Hargrave during dinner. She seems tired. Pale. Her fingers tremble slightly as she pours the wine. Has she seen the letter? Is she the one it's about? Your appetite shrivels. After the meal, Clara corners you in the corridor. You look ill, she says, brow furrowed. What's wrong? You shake your head. Just tired. She doesn't believe you, but doesn't press. She's loyal like that. You lie awake in your bed, the letter now tucked beneath your pillow. Every creak of the house feels loaded. Every whisper of wind a secret being passed. The next morning, Mr. Hargrave leaves early, carriage wheels splashing through puddles. You watch from the window. The maid's replacement arrives by noon, nervous, wiry, young. You wonder how long she'll last. You wish you could ask someone about the letter, but who? Clara? Dangerous. Mrs. Hargrave? Unthinkable. The only person who might have answers, just rode away. You sit down to mend a ripped chemise and can't concentrate. The needle feels like a weapon in your hand. Suddenly, you understand something new: information, in this house, is power. And you've stumbled into a tiny, dangerous piece of it. Whether you wanted to or not. The afternoon brings with it a stubborn, gray drizzle and a house that feels somehow heavier, more expectant. The letter burns against your hip, still hidden in the deep fold of your apron. You can't stop replaying its phrases, rereading each invisible line in your mind as though it might rearrange itself and offer a clearer truth. But it never does. You need air. You glance down the corridor. Empty. You whisper a vague excuse to Clara, just checking the laundry line, and slip out the back door. The garden gate is ajar, swinging slightly in the wet breeze. That's strange. Mr. Hargrave insists on latching it. Always. Still, you push it open and step into the walled garden. The rain has softened everything. Mud squelches under your thin shoes, and the roses drip like they've been crying. You breathe in the earthy scent of wet soil, crushed mint, damp wood. It's the first moment of quiet you've had all day, maybe all week. Maybe ever. You sit on the stone bench beneath the arbor, hands in your lap, back straight out of habit. But then you let yourself relax, just a bit. Your head tilts toward the ivy-strewn wall behind you, and your eyes drift shut. Mainstream historical fact: Victorian gardens were considered both aesthetic sanctuaries and social symbols. Women were encouraged to walk in them for delicate constitution, though only at certain hours and, naturally, with decorum. Quirky tidbit: some wealthier households kept hedgehogs in their gardens as natural pest control. You half wish one would waddle by now, just to break the tension. Historians still argue whether moments like this, solitary, unchaperoned, unproductive, were subversive acts of female autonomy or merely brief reprieves engineered by patriarchal structures. But you don't feel subversive. You feel hidden. Until you realize you're not alone. Footsteps. Soft. Careful. Coming down the path behind you. You stiffen. Slowly turn. Clara. She looks both relieved and annoyed. There you are. I've been looking. You smile thinly. Just needed some air. She nods, not entirely convinced. You missed tea. I wasn't hungry. There's a pause. Then Clara sits beside you, pulling her shawl tighter. For a while, neither of you speak. I used to come here, she says quietly, when I was first brought to this house. I hated it. Felt like the walls were too close. This, she gestures toward the drizzling sky and the swaying hedge, was the only place that didn't ask anything of me. You turn your head toward her. Do you still hate it? She doesn't answer right away. Sometimes. But it's better now. Because I know where the cracks are. You wonder if she's talking about the garden or the family. Probably both. You reach into your apron. You consider showing her the letter. You don't. Instead, you ask, did you ever hear about a girl who worked here, and then didn't? Clara gives you a look. Calculating. Not unkind, but wary. Maybe. You wait. So does she. Then she rises. Come in soon. If they ask where you were, say you were fetching rosemary for the stew. You nod. She walks away without glancing back. You remain on the bench a moment longer, heart ticking just a little faster than before. Back inside, you do exactly as she suggested. No one questions you. Dinner comes and goes. Mrs. Hargrave barely touches her food. Mr. Hargrave is absent again. As you climb the stairs to bed, you brush your fingers along the wooden banister. It feels smooth, familiar. But your world has shifted. You now carry a letter. A question. A secret. A maybe. And in the garden, you saw a crack. It's not much. But it's the beginning of something. Even if you're not sure what yet. The house is quiet, save for the creaks of old wood and the occasional drip from the gutter outside your window. You've peeled off your damp apron, unlaced your boots, and washed your face with cold water from a chipped porcelain basin. Everything feels heavier tonight, your limbs, your thoughts, even the wool blanket waiting for you on the narrow bed. You move slowly, folding your dress over the back of a chair, your corset beside it. A slight relief, but the absence of pressure doesn't make breathing easier. If anything, it makes you more aware of the knot in your chest, the one the letter tied. You slip into the itchy nightdress. The candle flickers beside you, casting elongated shadows across the walls. You think about blowing it out, but there's something oddly comforting about the flame, like it's the last voice in the room whispering, "You're still here." From downstairs, muffled voices. You can't hear what they're saying, but the tone is familiar, clipped, urgent, veiled in politeness. You imagine Mrs. Hargrave holding a teacup she doesn't want, nodding at a man she doesn't trust. Mainstream historical fact: women in 1860s Britain had no legal identity separate from their husbands. A married woman couldn't own property, sue, or even have custody of her children. Legally, you were part of your husband's body. A legal fiction, sure, but a lived nightmare for many. Quirky tidbit: some women began sewing secret pockets inside their corsets, tiny stitched spaces for contraband letters, coins, or clippings from books they weren't supposed to read. The female body, literally weaponized for resistance. Historians still argue whether the Victorian woman was entirely subjugated or whether small acts, like what you're doing now, formed a quiet rebellion. Reading stolen letters. Asking dangerous questions. Choosing when to speak and when to wait. You lie down. The mattress is lumpy. The blanket smells faintly of lavender, though it's lost most of its strength. You curl to one side, then the other, trying to get comfortable without waking the rusted springs. You replay everything in your mind again. The street, the rain, the doctor's absurd diagnosis, the garden, Clara's careful deflection, and that cursed letter. The ink still dances behind your eyelids. It said, she saw too much. Who? What did she see? And what happened to her? You wonder if the Hargraves know you found it. If someone left it for you on purpose. If it's even real, or some elaborate household prank meant to amuse the footmen. But then you remember how Clara didn't laugh. You reach under your pillow and touch the folded paper. Still there. You breathe in. Out. The house seems to hold its breath with you. Somewhere in the night, a cat yowls. Somewhere else, a carriage rumbles past the gate. And in your mind, a plan is starting to form. You're not sure what it looks like yet. Maybe it's a conversation with Clara, maybe it's a late-night snoop through the study, maybe it's something bigger. But whatever it is, you'll be the one doing it. Tomorrow. For now, you close your eyes. The candle guttered long ago. The night deepens, and the last echoes of the house dissolve into silence. The voices, the secrets, the rustle of skirts and clink of teacups, all fade like mist in morning sun. What remains is softness. Stillness. The quiet breath of a world paused between questions. You lie there in the dark, the letter now just a faint press beneath your hand. Its urgency dimmed for now, like a dream you'll revisit later when your thoughts are clearer and your heart less full. Outside, the garden waits under moonlight. The roses are bowed with rain, their petals closed like secrets too shy for the day. Somewhere, a hedgehog might be rustling through the damp hedges. Or maybe not. It doesn't matter. What matters is that, for this one moment, you are safe. You are warm. And though the day has asked too much of you, taken too much, pressed too hard, you are still here. The ceiling above your bed is just a patch of soft gray in the dark. The blanket rises and falls with your breath, and each exhale pulls you closer to sleep. Maybe tomorrow brings answers. Maybe it brings more questions. But for now, none of that matters. You are allowed to rest. And as your eyes close and your thoughts finally settle, you drift into a sleep full of warm fog and distant music, of gardens without gates and skies without smoke. Good night.